Is visiting Muir Woods worth it? Really, it's a fair question. I mean, it's a bit of a drive from San Francisco. You're going to be dealing with some twisty, turny roads. You might get stuck behind some bicyclists. When you get here, it could be really, really crowded. And if you don't have a parking permit, in the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you what I know about Muir Woods and hopefully help you make that decision, should you come or not. I'm going to talk about the redwood trees, a little bit about the park, the history. We're going to kind of find some hidden spots that you might miss, and I'm going to share with you some tips that I've learned after multiple trips to this national monument. My map got wet and it's not doing so well. I wanted to share with you the first tip, and that's where I am right now. I'm at Camp Alist, Eastwood. It's a great out and back hike for people who have never been to Muir Woods before. You get here and there are picnic tables, there's water, there's a bathroom. It's not too strenuous a hike, and if you do come here, it'll probably get you away from the majority of crowds, which on a busy kind of summertime day, that can be a really good thing. So what is Muir Woods all about? Muir Woods is all about the redwood tree. And the redwood tree is a rare and beautiful species of tree. And it has a really limited habitat. It kind of hugs the coast of central California all the way up to, I guess, the middle of the Oregon border. And it needs kind of cool, foggy areas. So today, the fact that it's raining here, the redwood trees really love it. It's the tallest species of tree in the world. And it's one of the oldest living things on the planet. Now, just in terms of sheer size, I believe there are redwood trees on the North Coast that are among the largest living things on the planet. These trees can reach 350 feet or almost 35 stories, depending on, how big the stories are. But they are absolutely enormous. So you got to ask yourself, why are these trees so darn tall? And I'm going to nerd out a little bit here because that's what I do. But you should know, I mean, you're here in this park and you look at these redwood trees, and what are the things that make them grow so tall? Obviously, the first thing is going to be genetics and natural selection. As these trees get bigger and taller, they continue to reach for the sunlight. And as they reach for the sunlight, they block out the sun for the trees that are below them. And so the trees that are really good at getting tall, they survive and they pass those genes on to the next generation of trees, kind of like Darwin said they should. And of course, as these trees get taller, they have more branches and more leaves or needles at the end. And that allows them to absorb more water, which helps them grow even taller. And the other thing that those leaves do is they drip water. They catch the fog that comes in, it collects on the leaves, it drips down onto the ground, and the root system is able to then collect more water. When you have a virgin forest, it allows kind of for one species of tree to be dominant, and here it's the redwood tree. And what happens is the redwood tree's root systems, which are very shallow, they interlock and they support each other. And the water is able to be absorbed more readily, and that root structure, it helps the trees be strong as they grow tall. And when I thought about shallow root system, that's kind of like, well, I would think the trees would fall over. But because it's all interlocked, that doesn't happen. And finally, they're so tall because they live so damn long. These trees can live thousands and thousands of years. They are among the oldest things on the planet. And when they live that long, they grow. They grow fast when they're younger, 1 to 2 feet a year. And when they reach their kind of peak height, that can really slow down, like a couple of inches a year. But when you add a couple of inches a year over 1,000 years, that frickin' adds up. You gotta forgive me if I'm a little excited about the redwood trees. I have grown up in Northern California, and I went to school in extreme Northern California near Redwoods National Park. I've been an outdoorsy kind of person most of my life, and these trees, these redwood trees, I don't know, they mean something to me, and I just love to be among them. So one of the really cool things about Muir Woods is it is a virgin redwood forest. And what does that really mean? Essentially what that means is this forest has been here for a long, long time and has never been disturbed by humans. We haven't cut trees down, we haven't kind of come in here and messed with it. And over time, a virgin forest develops very unique characteristics. In a virgin forest, you have an ecosystem that has been consistent for a long, long period of time. And everything here in the virgin redwood forest has kind of got really good at living here. It's been optimized because the systems that are in place here, the plants, the trees, the mosses, the lichens, everything here, it has evolved over time to be successful in this particular situation. Now, you can look up at the crowns of the redwood trees, and when you look up, there is a very particular habitat or ecosystem that's happening, 250 or 300 feet off the ground. Insects and birds and mosses and lichens and other things. Very unique to kind of that height. And if you look at the ground, and I really encourage you to spend time looking at the ground, it's a completely different ecosystem. Okay, maybe it's not completely different. It's a very different ecosystem. The lichens, the insects, the animals, the soil, all of these things, very different conditions from below and above. And because it's been consistent, this forest has been here for so long, all of the species in it, they like it here. They live really well here. And as long as we don't disturb them or they're not disturbed by changing weather, it'll go on for another, I don't even know how long. All right, I'm here and I got to thinking. About why was it 150 years ago or so, us people in the United States, we started valuing these outdoor places. This was designated a national monument in 1908. In the 1870s, Yellowstone. After that, it was Yosemite. And there were a series of parks that were created. And then we created the Forest Service. And then I think in 1916, we created the National Park Service. And we were the first country in the world who really went to these lengths to protect the great outdoors. Well, why the heck did we do that? I mean, it's not like it just happened one day, the president woke up and said, hey, let's do this. That's not the way it went down. So I looked into it because you knew I was going to look into it, right? And so in the late 19th century, the conservation movement started. And why did it start? Well, there were a few people who were really instrumental in kind of bringing attention to the great outdoors. And one of those guys was John Muir, and we're in Muir Woods. And Muir kind of explored a lot of rough and rugged places and wrote about them. And people read what he wrote, and it kind of woke them up to the possibilities of the outdoors and why these places were special and why they needed to be protected. And when Muir got together with President Roosevelt and they started talking up in Yosemite, well, that kind of got things really rolling. Now, kind of in concert with this awareness was the rapid kind of industrialization and urbanization of America. America was growing gangbusters, and industry was eating up the great outdoors, and cities were expanding. And I think it was the conservation movement, along with kind of what was happening. People realized, look, this is going too fast. If we don't do something about it, we're going to lose all of these lands. I mean, growth is good, and we like that the economy is growing and that we're making money, but come on, we have to protect these areas. And because the economy was growing, the standard of living was coming up. And I have a personal story here. My grandmother, here are some pictures of my grandmother and her family in Yosemite in I think the 1920s or maybe the 1930s. My family came to this country at the end of the 19th century, and 30 years later they had risen enough economically that they could take a vacation. They would go to the beaches, they would go to the Napa Valley, and they would go to Yosemite. And because people really started to go outdoors more and take advantage of these natural resources, it just became more and more important to protect these places for future generations. Finally, well, probably not finally, there's probably a lot more to it than I'm going through, but one of the other things that is worth noting is we became more aware of kind of cultural and historical significance and the need to protect that for future generations. And so that's what we did. And when you take all these things together and you kind of meld them, you go, okay, well, that makes a certain amount of sense why at the end of the 19th or the early 20th century, we kind of began to protect all of these places and to create kind of these parks and monuments and places where people could go and enjoy the great outdoors. Pop quiz. What is the difference between a national park, like Yosemite, and a national monument, like Muir Woods? Do you know? I didn't know, but I looked it up. And here's what I found out. To be a national park, it is an act of Congress. It takes a lot more of those folks in Washington getting together to do something, and it's typically a lot larger of an area. Now, a national monument can be designated by a president or Congress. It's typically a lot smaller of an area. That's the difference between a national park and a national monument. So how did this place come to be? Who protected Muir Woods, and what's the story there? Well, there were a couple of really rich people. There was William Kent and his wife, Elizabeth Thatcher Kent. And the Kents came out to the West Coast, the San Francisco area, in 1903. They moved from Chicago. They were very wealthy and they had made their money a long time ago. And as they explored the area, they fell in love with the beautiful natural resources that are here in Northern California. And this particular area, it was called, I think, Redwood Canyon at the time. Redwood Canyon was under threat. And there were developers and people who were interested in damming it up and creating a reservoir and taking the lumber out. All of these economic interests wanted in here. And the Kents, they said, no, we're going to buy this place. And that's what they did. They purchased the land in Redwood Canyon, and then in 1907, they gave that land to the federal government. And Theodore Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, was the one who made this a national monument. So we have the Kent family to thank for that. But it's a little more complicated than that, because William Kent, he was a bit of a racist, actually. And you can look this up. It's on the National Parks website on Muir Woods. He was really against immigration, specifically Asians coming to this part of the world, and was very, very involved in that. And so he has this kind of dual history that people look. They're like, well, he was a great conservationist, but on the other hand, he wasn't so good in this area. Now, his wife, on the other hand, Elizabeth Thatcher Kent, well, her family, her great-grandfather was one of the original founding fathers. So she was an old blue blood. Now, the other interesting thing about her, she was instrumental in getting women the right to vote in California in 1911. And that came about 10 years before that law took effect federally. So once again, California, it was a bit ahead of the curve. Okay, I promised you some local tips, so here they are, all right? First tip, get here at 8 a.m. It may be a little tough to get out of bed, but man, I was the first one in the parking lot. I had the first parking reservation slot, and I have this place to myself. Now, that could be because the weather's a little iffy today, which is also kind of a great time to visit this place because it keeps the crowds down. The other thing is parking. It's kind of ridiculous how many signs they have, but I guess it bears saying, make sure you have a parking permit. Make sure that it's saved on your phone, that you are not dependent on the internet or wireless to get it. Better yet, print it out. That's what I did. Because if you show up, if you make the drive, if you get here and you don't have a parking permit, they're not letting you in. Another tip is about hiking. We are in a valley. Muir Woods is in a very particular place, and the redwood trees are packed in here. And I would encourage you to do a hike that keeps you low. There's a hike called Canopy View that I did a while back, and I got out of this virgin redwood forest, and it wasn't the same. And so I like this hike, I think I talked about it earlier today, an out and back to the Alist Eastwood. And if you're lucky enough to come when there's bad weather, there's a certain feel that you get where you know that the redwood trees are just thriving, and the wetness, the dampness, the fog, all of the things kind of that are really critical to these trees being healthy. It's kind of nice being here on a day when the weather is not sunny and bright. And if you're going to come all this way, if you're going to drive here to Muir Woods and you get here at 8 in the morning, like I'm suggesting, then you have time to make a full day trip of kind of this part of California. You can go north on Highway 1. You can stop in Stinson Beach, maybe for a cup of coffee and to walk on the beach. You might want to explore Bolinas or keep heading north on Highway 1 to go to Point Reyes Station where you can grab some lunch. The drive itself is beautiful and you pass right by the Bear Valley Visitor Center. You could hike the Earthquake Trail. It's a very short, beautiful hike where you learn about the earthquake, and the Visitor Center itself is just a fabulous place to visit. And then to get back, I would head out Sir Francis Drake Boulevard back to Highway 101. Enjoy some of the smaller towns in Marin County. There's the Mountain Biking Hall of Fame Museum in Fairfax you might want to check out. So there's a lot here. It's really easy to make a day of this and make Muir Woods the first stop of a kind of cool Northern California day. And finally, I guess, is it worth coming here to Muir Woods? There are some challenges. You're going to deal potentially with cars and crowds and other things. But if you've never been and seen the redwood trees and you don't have a chance to go to Redwood National Park or maybe Big Basin south of San Francisco, which I believe is a state park, this is a really fabulous place to visit. And to be in a virgin redwood forest, it might be the only chance you have in your life to do this. And if that's the case, yeah, you want to do it. You want to be here. You want to explore this place. It's a national monument for a reason, and that reason is because it's freaking unique and beautiful. Where am I? Alist Lockwood. 2. Can you hear that? Not sure what it is, but I'm not stopping. A little bit chilly.